Welcome to Mintbean. Thank you so much for joining today's session. I'm super excited. If you were on one of the workshops I was hosting yesterday, you know we launched registration for our hiring hackathon that I'm super excited for. It's a hiring hackathon for junior devs. This is going to be a super exciting event. If you haven't signed up, please do. It's going to be a lot, there's going to be a lot of stuff. It's not just the hackathon. There's 3 challenges for the event, which is front end, back end, and full stack. You can pick one or you can do all 3. We do recommend that you focus on quality and not focus on the number of challenges. And that's it for the hiring hack. For today's session, I do want to start by expressing my gratitude for everyone on this call for joining us again. It's always nice to see a lot of familiar faces. I see a few faces that always pop up, and it's really nice to kind of see that, for you guys to keep coming back and just show a lot of love to our guests. So thank you. I guess the last thing I want to say about that is if you're not on the Mintbean Discord, please do. Fantastic community of devs that are always ready to support you. All right, that's all my plugs. Jesse, welcome to Mintbean. Thank you so much for making some time for us today. I'm super excited. I know we've had you here before, and it was back in February when you did Webpack Essentials for us. I want you to introduce yourself for us.
Sure, I'm happy to. Great. Yeah, well, thank you for having me here again. It's really exciting to be with you all and go over this topic of regular expressions, which I think can oftentimes be kind of an abstract concept until you really start playing with it and get to know it a bit better. So I'm excited to share that with you all today. Cool. We only have 30 minutes for this session, so it isn't a ton of time. So I'm just going to kind of jump right into it. Sure. And with that, this is a quick agenda that we'll do. Again, just 30 minutes, so it's going to go pretty quickly. I'll give a quick intro of myself. Who am I? We'll talk about what a regular expression even is. Like, what does it mean when we talk about regular expressions, or sometimes people call them regex or regex. Some different use cases for it. And then at the end, hopefully we'll have a little bit of time for discussion, question and answers, and some additional resources that we can share with you all. So as we go through this, feel free to put questions in the chat, or in some cases even unmute yourself and ask a question. We've got a smaller group today, so I think we can have a bit more audience participation and kind of back and forth feedback. So please feel free to do that. And I'm going to pause occasionally just so we can have a second for people to ask questions as well. Cool. So let's start off with, who am I? So my name's Jesse. I currently work at Tesla as a software engineer. And I transitioned into software engineering from the world of customer success, which some of you may be familiar with at various tech companies, basically customer-facing roles. I completed a boot camp called App Academy, and then ultimately landed at Tesla, where I am now. So that's kind of quick background about me. If you want to learn more about me, feel free to go to jessecolligan.com. You can also contact me that way as well. And let's jump into the meat of regular expressions. So what is a regular expression? The basics here, this is the official definition from the Mozilla documentation online. Regular expressions are patterns used to match character combinations in strings. So what does that actually mean? So I think a good way to inspect this a bit further is I have actually here, if you go to the Mintbean website, right? So if we go to mintbean.io, and then we inspect the page, over on the right side, you'll see all these HTML elements, classes, etc., what we call the DOM, right? So what I've basically done is copied all of this into this website called regex 101, which is hugely helpful. And I strongly encourage you, as you're playing around with different regular expression things, to come here and kind of try it out if needed. And I'll go into more. You'll see how this works in a second. the site itself. So what we're looking at here, this is just all of the Mintbean website, just copied and pasted directly into this area here. So you can see, you know, we've got all of these different like padding and classes and divs and whatever. It's just like a huge amount of text, right? And so what I'd like to show you is a few just example use cases, right? So recall what the definition was, right? If we go back to this slide, regular expressions are patterns used to match character combinations in strings. So we have a giant string here, which is just all of the HTML from the Mintbean website, right? So let's say, for example, we want to see all of a particular thing. And the example I'm going to use here is just PNG files. So I want to see all of the PNG files that are used here, right? So I guess one way you could do that is just to search like PNG, but a more sophisticated way perhaps is to use a regular expression. And we're going to kind of gradually what the thing we're searching for here is. So the first thing, I'm just going to paste this from something I prepared previously, and we'll talk about how this is structured. Is I'm just doing HTTP and then this and then .png. Okay, so at a very high level, I'm not going to get deep into the syntax of regular expressions. I just want to give kind of an overview to understand what they are and how they can be used. This is basically saying we want to find a string, every string, where we have it starts with HTTP and then has basically anything inside and then ends with .png. So we're looking at any string that starts with HTTP, has anything inside, and then ends with .png. And so we can see our different matches, right? So for example, it highlights the matches for you. You can see source is this link here, and then .png at the very end, and also here, right? So already you can see the power of regular expressions. You can select something really specific in a large or even small string, right? So this is great, but let's suppose that we actually want to select more PNG files. What I noticed is that in this file, there's actually other PNGs, like this one, for example, which it looks like they're stored locally. They're not actually HTTP addresses, right? Okay, cool. So it looks like what we're doing here isn't actually selecting these ones, is it? So how can we actually select those? So instead, what I'm going to do is I'm going to change our regular expression slightly here. I'm just going to delete what we have and paste again, prepared this beforehand. So now we're looking for, okay, it starts with source, src, and then has anything inside, and then .png, right? And so now you'll see that we are selecting these source PNG ones. You can see a few of the matches, but now we're not matching the ones that we were matching previously, right? The ones that started with HTTP. So the good news is you can start to mix and match and get even more complex and sophisticated rules here, where I just replaced it again with something that I prepared before. You can see now it's selecting the http.png and also should be selecting our source PNG, right? And so we added this kind of or operation here. So we can find it starts with HTTP or this source string has anything inside and then ends with .png, right? So this is the power of regular expressions, is they're extremely flexible. They're a little unwieldy and can get kind of messy if you're not careful and maybe select things that you don't intend. But this is really the power of them, is you can select, you can replace things in strings easily. You can check to see if a particular string has some regular expression inside. So that's kind of a quick and dirty overview of what a regular expression is. It's this up here. It's this regular expression that's used to select a substring within a larger string. So I just want to pause for a second and see if anyone has any questions before we continue. And I see that Navi said, yes, I'm bouncing because I'm using an exercise ball as my chair here. Cool, some good questions. All right, what are some common use cases for regular expressions? Why does it have to begin and end within a regular expression? Charles says, I've used it for form validation, but that's about it. Okay, cool. Kathy says, I love that. Why, Jenny, can you help me understand your question better? What does it have to begin and end within regular expression? The syntax. Okay. I'm not going to cover syntax too deeply, but I'll just kind of give a high-level overview here quickly. Again, I encourage you to go to this regex101.com, and they have a lot of guides down here in the bottom right of how to select various things that you can just kind of add in. But what this is separated into is, you may have noticed this, 3 different what are called capturing groups, right? And you'll see it says that as I hover over, it's these parentheses. So this is the first capturing group, then the second capturing group, and the third. So what it's basically saying here is we want to find either the source or HTTP. That's what this or character does. And then this here is a way of saying anything, basically. So we look for anything that isn't a space, essentially, and then ends with PNG, right? So those are 3 different groups. The group in the middle here can basically be almost anything, right? So it's not nearly as specific as these others. I'm not sure if that answered your question. Yeah, and then a good question, what is GM? It's a very good question. These are some additional what are called flags, which allow you to customize it just a little bit further. So for example, if we didn't have the G, it would only find the first one, right? G stands for global. And so you can see immediately once I did that, some of them like were no longer highlighted. M is multi-line, so that allows it to look on multiple lines. Case insensitive, right? So you have like these further options that you can apply. Cool, I don't want to spend too much time on syntax because again, we have pretty limited time. And I'd like to go to another question that was asked, which was about use cases. And that's where I want to now focus on for most of the rest of the talk. So there's basically infinite use cases, I think. But where I see value in this, someone I think was Charles mentioned form validation, right? So this is a great point. So you can use regular expressions to validate the user input so that it aligns with particular criteria that you're looking for. So the first example here would be an email, for example. How do you know that the user, when they're typing in their email, is actually a valid email, right? You could search and make sure that it includes an @ symbol, right? But that's not the best way necessarily. Maybe all they put is like 5 @ symbols. And if you just do, the input string includes that @ symbol, that passes your validation. That's probably not sufficient to capture all the situations that you really want, right? And so you can do a bit more complex but precise regular expressions that will allow you to do more refined and specific validation, right? So if we do like hey.net, for example, you'll notice that this is not highlighted, which means it's not being, the regular expression is not found there, right? So hey.net is not valid, but hey.net is, right? It doesn't matter how long it is. It could be as long as you want. Looks like there's some additional validation here. Yeah, didn't like the semicolons, right? So, but maybe you are okay with semicolons, right? You could incorporate that into the expression if you wanted. So this is one use case, right? A user inputs some text input. It's their name, it's an email, it's a phone number, it's a password, right? Things like that you can use regular expressions for and say, hey, this is a valid input or not a valid input. It looks like We have some more questions coming in. So if you have questions, just feel free to ask. I'm monitoring the chat as we go along. Yeah, go ahead, Heather. If that was Heather. Oop. Okay, maybe not.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Yeah, no problem.
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Do you start with your search like broadest down to narrowest? Or does it matter what, like when you're building these separate expressions that you're looking for?
Yeah, that's a really good question. Let's talk about that at the end, because there's a one piece of this talk which is more about how to build these in an efficient way that we'll touch on that. That's a great question, though. Cool. And so just some other quick examples of a similar pattern, right? You can do, for example, phone numbers. And I think this is getting to your question a little bit, Heather, which is, so I have 3 example phone numbers here, right? With slightly different formats. The first has hyphens separating different little number groups. The second has a country code at the begin, or sorry, the second one has no hyphens. The third one has a country code at the beginning and hyphens, right? So depending on what you're expecting from the user, you can evolve your regular expression, right? So try to think of all of the use cases. Again, going to back to Heather's question, how do you think about building these? Do you think about like the broad use case and then get more specific? I would just encourage you to think of as many of the use cases as you can up front, and then refine it over time as you need to, right? So let's say, for example, we want to start with this, right? We're only dealing with US-based numbers in this example, right? So I've included the regular expressions down here. I'm just copying and pasting those. You'll see them evolve. So this first one, right? You'll notice what's highlighted here, the entire number. Okay, great. In test 3, for example, though, the country code at the beginning is not included, right? So this you might be able to validate with this, but you'd be missing some part if you're looking for that country code, right? And you would also be missing the situation where the user doesn't put hyphens in. So, okay, what about a situation where we do want to include the country code? Okay, cool. So now we have that country code included, but notice we're not matching the first one. So the obvious solution, of course, is to modify the regular expression slightly so that we are addressing both situations. And then notice we're still not selecting option 2. So the very final option that selects all 3, which let's assume actually matches your requirements, is this last one I have here at the bottom, with or without country code and with or without hyphens. So you'll see that this captures all 3. So you have to think again, is this the situation we want, or do we want to force the user to enter in their data in some format like this with hyphens or with a country code or without a country code, right? These are questions you ultimately need to address that are kind of outside the scope of regular expressions and more just like UX design. Cool, so that's another use case. Passwords, I think, are a good one as well, right? So if you talk about, oftentimes various services will have some type of password requirement. It has to be a certain amount of characters, at least one uppercase letter, lowercase letter, a number, a symbol, right? So you can, to validate that user input again, you can take those rules that you've come up with and then create a regular expression around that, right? So if your password is just password, for example, guess what? That's not going to be matched by that regular expression. And so thinking about the logic around this, you could then reject a password that's entered that's literally just lowercase password, right? Not a good password, of course. Cool. One other situation that I think is helpful thinking about regular expressions, it's a bit more outside of the box, is in your text editor, right? In some cases, you want to replace a lot of text in one go. So if you use, like I use VS Code, for example, I imagine some of you use VS Code or Atom or something Sublime Text, right? you can use your text editor's searching capability to usually replace certain text with some other text. So what you can do is say, okay, I want to find all of my a particular type of function, right? So if you're familiar with JavaScript, we have what are called ES5 functions and then ES6 functions, which are the ones with the arrow, right? So they're a little bit different in their format. So you could theoretically select all of the existing functions you have that are a particular format and then use a regular expression to change all of them, right, within your text editor. I don't have a live demo of this, but I just want to throw it out there that it's a concept that exists. Okay, cool. So let's now talk about what Heather was touching on earlier, which is thinking about how to build them, right? As you can tell, they can be kind of hard to read, right? Like if you looked at that, would you know what is going on? And even if you looked at it for a few minutes, it might still be difficult, right? Same with this. Okay, what is that even saying? It can be difficult for other people or even yourself, you know, to understand what's going on. So that's just one thing to keep in mind. It can be hard for others to read and understand. And they can also introduce some functionality sometimes that you're not necessarily expecting. Like you might think you have only these 5 use cases to select, but maybe you actually have these 7 and you didn't think about those 2 additional ones, right? So you're actually doing something that's not quite right and introducing some bugs, right? So you need to be really thorough when you're creating regular expressions because they're going to be executed consistently, right? So this leads us to kind of the general guidelines here, which is the more precise the regular expression, the better, because then you avoid situations where you're selecting things that you don't actually expect to be selecting. So specificity prevents capturing the undesired parts. Specificity improves performance, which we'll talk about in a second, right? And the performance piece comes into play, especially when you're dealing with much larger strings. So in this case, this is a deliberately bad regular expression to show you that we're basically saying anything inside the carets, anything between these 2 little element caret things, and then any character inside the caret. So it's like, it's extremely broad and vague. And so actually what this is called is catastrophic backtracking. And where that comes from is, you may have noticed this, but at the very top right in this regex 101 site, it will show you the number of matches and the number of steps and how long it took for that operation to complete, right? So in this case, it's 86 steps. And so what does that mean? Catastrophic backtracking and number of steps? Well, if you actually click on that button, it will show you the individual steps it takes to try to make your regular expression work, right? And search the string for that. So it'll start matching, and then it'll find something that doesn't match or does match, and then move on, right? And so you can kind of see step by step how this is playing out. And basically this just goes on for so long. You can see here 10,000, or what is that, 103,000, etc. That's too many steps. That's way more steps than we want, right? Versus if we go, I think it's here, yeah, the regex debugger, you can see how it is being applied, right? So this could be helpful for debugging it sometimes. Cool. So to review again, the more precise the regular expression, the better in general. Being specific not only prevents capturing of undesired parts, but it also generally improves the performance. So with that, we have a few minutes of Q&A discussion. I know this was extremely quick. There's a lot more that can be talked about here, but I think the best way to learn the syntax and get comfortable is to just try it out yourself. Like find some giant string, like the Mintbean website, for example, the HTML there, just copy it into that regex101.com, or there are other sites that are very similar, and just start playing around and see if you can capture what you want to capture. So I'm going to pause and feel free to ask questions.
That was lightning fast, man.
It was fast. I told you.
It's a good talk, though. How long do we have you, Jesse?
Just a few more minutes, like 5 minutes.
Okay.
Here, I'll put all these links into the chat. I'm hoping. Do the URLs?
Are you on our server?
I'm not.
Can you get on our server?
Yeah, sure.
What's the best way to ask you questions? LinkedIn, Twitter?
LinkedIn is fine. Yeah, LinkedIn or Twitter are both fine.
Okay, cool. All right, I'm gonna make sure everybody has time to ask you questions. So guys, please feel free to unmute yourself. We have 5 minutes with Jesse. Just throw your questions at him.
I'm also, people are asking for the resources and links and stuff. I'm just gonna put this presentation directly there for you guys in the chat. So if you go to,
sorry, I'll drop it in the event chat once you put it here.
Awesome. Cool. So we have a few questions. One question, I've used regular expressions before to scrape data from a PDF that had a lot of different units. Is that a common use case? Possibly, it's definitely a use case. There are so many use cases for regular expressions. It's basically whenever you're searching for or wanting to manipulate a bunch of tiny little pieces of a much larger string, right? So that could be any type of data. That could be data that represents a PDF. That could be data that represents a website. That could be data in like a massive log of a bunch of interactions with a server or something, things like that.
And you can just start typing this in your VS Code, or do you have to have some sort of resource you have to do first, or?
Yeah, good question. So if we, for example, let's open up the DOM here really quickly, and I'm just gonna grab, let's say, hey, what is up? And then what's your name, sir?
Matt.
All right, cool. So let's say we have this string here, and I'll make it a bit bigger. Regular expressions generally are built in, there's like a built-in API with most languages, I believe, definitely JavaScript. So let's say, for example, we want to do .replace or .match, right? These are just functions that are related to strings, but you can use regular expressions for them, right? So if we say, for example, what, right? This is obviously a very simple contrived example, but this is essentially saying we're searching for the string, the substring what within this larger string as many times as we want. That's what the G says. So if we add like a what, hey, what, let's make sure I spell it right. And then hit enter. This should return us, all of the places where that matches. Or let's say instead we want to say replace, and then we want to replace it with, instead of what, we say, let's make it all capitals, right? Let's say what. And you can see that's now replaced.
That's pretty cool.
Yeah, so it's very versatile. Another question from Charles, really awesome session. Regex is always one of those esoteric topics not often talked about. Yeah, I agree, which is why I suggested Navi doing this session, is that I feel like it's oftentimes something that's sort of glossed over, and no one really goes super deep into it necessarily, but it's used so often, but not always, from what I've observed, to like its fullest potential necessarily. So yeah, this is a very quick overview of how to think about regular expressions, use cases, etc. So I hope this was helpful.
Perfect. Thank you so much. Really, really appreciate it.
Yeah, no problem. It was fun, and I hope you all got something from it.
Most definitely.
Cool.
Yeah. Thanks again. All right, guys. Take care. Enjoy the rest of your Wednesdays. Bye.
All right. Bye-bye.